Welcome to Quilting with Cindy Botts. Today we're going to talk about chain piecing and strip piecing and the trip around the world pattern. So this is my work in progress. This is my trip around the world. Alright, you can see it's going to be, well, it depends. It depends how many strips you want to put on it, how many series. I think this is just going to be a lap quilt for me. So this is the center block for the trip around the world. And then as you add your squares, the circle becomes larger. All right, so in the next row will be this dark blue, and you can see how it's bigger. And then the next will be the red. And again, it just keeps going around and around and around. Hence the name Trip Around the World. Okay, so this is done with strip piecing. So the first thing you do is decide how big you want your squares to be, and they'll all be identical in size. Well, first you want to pick out your fabric. Whether you want these series to repeat every 6 colors, if you want 8 colors, and then the repeat begins. I believe I have 5 colors for mine, and then the series repeats. So I cut these at 2.5 inches, so every 10 inches my pattern's gonna repeat. Okay, so to start with, I cut strips of fabric 2.5 by width of fabric. So here's my first strip. I go ahead and we cut that. Then we take and we start sewing the strips together. So simply said and done. Width of fabric, regular 1/4 inch seam, sew 2 together, sew another 2 together, and another 2 together until you have your whole series. Now again, I said I had 5 colors, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are my 5 strips cut at 2.5 and sewn together. Now, a trick to do when you sew these together, I'm going to give you a little tip. I run it through, then I turn it over and run it through again. So I actually have 2 rows of stitching on top of each other. And the reason I do that is because many times after I cut this, I'll walk away for a week, a couple days. However, and I don't want my stitching to come out. Now, some people are very confident with just one set of stitching, and that's fine. The other tip I want to give you is that if you do just one set of stitching, when you do this, start at this end and go this way. The next row, start at the opposite and go this way. Start at the opposite end. That'll help your fabric not to get lopsided on you, okay? So start at one end and go up, then start at the other end and go down, okay? Just to keep your fabric from getting lopsided. So then you go ahead and you press this down nice and flat, and you cut now some other strips. Now you're going to start at the side and cut off your bias, and then you're going to cut 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches down the length of fabric. So then you're going to get these pieces like this. All right, you're just going to get these 2.5 inch wide strips by 5 colors, 2.5 inch wide strip of 5 colors. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is sew those together. So you're going to sew the ending color and the beginning color of that strip together. So you're going to sew right there. Then you're going to flip it over and sew the other ends together. All right, so then you're going to have this tube. All right, that's going to make this tube. So we are doing strip piecing. Okay, we started with a long strip, cut it down into more strips, and now we're making this tube with the strips. So what is chain piecing? Let me show what chain piecing is. This is chain piecing. So I started with this piece, ran it through, did not cut my thread, ran the next piece through, did not cut my thread, ran the next piece through, and it makes this little chain. And then when you're done, you just snip them apart and turn it around and do the other set. Okay, so that is chain piecing. So once you have your tubes made, you're going to take your tube. Let's see if I have one cut here. You're going to take your tube and you're going to lay it alongside your trip around the world pattern, and you're going to determine where on your tube you're going to remove the stitching. Okay, so if I were to lay this here, you would see that the blue, then red, then pink is where it needs to be. So it would be this set of stitching I would take out. And now when you do this, one side is going to be a square longer than the other side because one square is your center. Okay, so just keep that in mind when you're doing it, and at the end you're going to want to put a strip down to make them identical. Okay, and when you're doing the actual strips, you want to keep that in mind too, so that you don't have one row ending with red, the next ending with blue, next with red. It just makes it easier for you to finish it. Okay, so just make sure that all your longer ones are on one side, so all your center ones, and then that goes that way, or your center one and then it goes this way. Okay, and then you begin to build with this block. Okay, it's kind of confusing, but the first time you sew it wrong, you'll be like, oh, I get it. Okay, or when you go to lay it down, it's like, wait a minute, how come this doesn't lay the way I want it to, and you'll figure that out. Okay, it's kind of confusing. You just have to be careful on that. Okay, so I determined that this is where I want it to be. So I took apart the seam and I laid it next to it, and then now this one is going to start with the blue. Okay, so it's not going to start with the red, so here's where that extra square is, right here. Okay, so instead of starting with the red, I'm starting with the blue. It's going to shorten up the one side and make the other side longer. Okay, so you just take those two strips and you sew here. Alright, and you sew that. So then you put it together and you want to nest your seams. What is nesting? That's another question to be answered. So you take your seam here and you put this top seam going one direction of that little square, and then if we flip it over, you want that to go the opposite direction, so that these two seams come right in and butt up close together. All right, that's nesting. Okay, I like to use clips and just start at the one end and bring my two pieces together, and then I would clip it right on that seam. Okay, just nest them in together, which is hard to do one-handed. There you go. Slide that in and clip it. Okay, and that will give you your seam. Okay, and you can see that right there. Okay, now it's easiest to have all your seams going in one direction. As you can see, these two are going the same direction, and that made it easy there, but whoops, not here. So try to keep your seams pressed going in one direction. It does make it easier for you for your nesting. Does it always work out that way? No. It's not a big deal, but it's one of those things to keep in mind. So I hope you try to make a trip around the world quilt. You have a great day. Bye-bye.